Lisa sat at her small oak desk in the corner of her home office, the dim glow of her laptop screen lighting up the room. She glanced at the spreadsheet open on her computer, scanning the numbers one more time. The monthly revenue from her digital marketing agency had hit another milestone, $45,000 for the month. It was surreal. 5 years ago, she was freelancing to make ends meet, and now she was running a full-fledged business with a remote team of 10. She leaned back in her chair, took a deep breath, and smiled to herself. Success like this had always seemed like something other people achieved, not her. But here she was. The sound of the front door closing jolted her out of her thoughts. She quickly minimized the spreadsheet and opened her email. It was her husband Mark coming home from work. Lisa didn't feel guilty about hiding her success, at least not at first. When her business started growing beyond her wildest expectations, she hadn't planned to keep it from him. She just didn't know how to bring it up. Mark had always been the type of man who liked being in control. The provider, the one who wore the pants, as he liked to joke. His job as a financial consultant paid decently, and for the first few years of their marriage they had lived comfortably. But Mark's career had stalled. Promotions passed him by, and his frustration began to seep into their relationship. Lisa, on the other hand, had been building something entirely new. What started as a side hustle, designing websites for small businesses in their community, slowly turned into a real opportunity. Her reputation grew, and soon she had more clients than she could handle. She taught herself how to scale her services, hired freelance developers, and eventually launched her own agency. By the time her income had surpassed Mark's 2 years ago, she decided to keep the information to herself. At first, it was out of fear. She worried about how Mark might react. He had always been supportive of her work in theory, but the idea of his wife being more financially successful than him might feel like an attack on his masculinity. It's not like he's ever asked me how much I make, Lisa thought to herself, rationalizing her decision. Over time, however, it became easier to keep the secret. She created a separate bank account under her business name, letting her personal account reflect a modest income that wouldn't raise any eyebrows. "Hey, babe," Mark called from the kitchen, his voice cutting through her thoughts. Lisa stood and stretched, closing her laptop. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, walking into the kitchen to meet him. Mark was already pouring himself a glass of wine, loosening his tie as he did. Same old," he said, sounding distracted. "Tough meeting this afternoon. They want us to bring in 3 new clients this quarter, but they're not giving us any support to make it happen." He sighed, taking a sip of his wine before sitting at the kitchen island. "How about you? Did you pick up any new clients?" Lisa hesitated. Yeah, a couple. Nothing big, just some maintenance work." She smiled, brushing off the question. It wasn't a total lie. She did still take on smaller clients here and there. But the truth was, she had just signed a 6-month contract with a well-known e-commerce company, worth $120,000. Mark nodded, barely listening, as he scrolled through his phone. It wasn't that he didn't care about Lisa's work, he just never seemed to take it seriously. To him, her freelancing was a hobby, something to keep her busy while he brought home the real money. Lisa felt a pang of frustration but swallowed it. There was no point in starting an argument. Later that night, after Mark had fallen asleep, Lisa lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced with questions she had been avoiding for months. Was she doing the right thing by keeping this secret? Would Mark even understand if she told him? She had spent so much time convincing herself that she was protecting their relationship, but deep down, she knew there was another reason. She liked having something that was hers, something Mark couldn't take credit for or control. The next morning, Lisa's routine was the same as always. She kissed Mark goodbye as he left for work, then retreated to her office with a cup of coffee to begin her day. Her first meeting was with her team, a group of talented developers, designers, and marketers from around the world. They connected over Zoom, discussing strategies for a new campaign they were launching for a client. "Great work, everyone," Lisa said as the meeting wrapped up. I'll send out the updated timeline this afternoon." After the call ended, Lisa leaned back in her chair and stared at her computer screen. She pulled up her bank account, glancing at the balance. $876,000. Most of it was invested, but the number still took her breath away. She thought about how different her life could be if she had the courage to share this with Mark. They could travel more, pay off the mortgage, even upgrade their home. But she knew it wasn't that simple. Mark had been increasingly distant lately. He spent more time out with his coworkers and their mutual friends, often without inviting Lisa to join. She noticed he had started texting more, his phone always face down on the table when they were together. Part of her wanted to confront him, but another part wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. That weekend, they attended a barbecue at the home of their friends, Tom and Sarah. Lisa's best friend, Emma, was there too, laughing and chatting with Mark as Lisa watched from across the yard. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something about their dynamic felt off. Emma had been her closest friend since college, practically family, and Lisa hated the nagging feeling of jealousy creeping in. "Stop overthinking," she told herself. But the unease lingered. Back at home that night, Lisa decided to push her feelings aside and focus on her work. She reminded herself that she had built something incredible, something no one could take away from her. But as she sat down to her computer, opening her emails, she couldn't shake the thought that her carefully constructed life was more fragile than it seemed. For now, she would keep the secret. It was easier that way. Or so she thought. Lisa sat on the edge of the bed, her hands gripping her phone as she read the text over and over. Mark had just messaged her from the office. "We need to talk tonight. Let's have dinner at home. I'll bring takeout." Those 4 words, "we need to talk," echoed in her head. They were the kind of words that made your stomach drop, the kind that could mean anything or nothing, but they were rarely good. Lisa put the phone down and tried to convince herself not to spiral into worst-case scenarios. Maybe it was about work. Maybe he wanted to take a vacation. Maybe, just maybe, it was nothing at all. But deep down, Lisa already knew. She had felt it for months now, the growing distance between them, the way Mark barely looked at her when she spoke, the constant excuses to stay out late or skip their usual Friday night dinners. Her best friend Emma had even noticed. "Mark seems off lately," Emma had said during one of their weekly coffee dates. "Is everything okay between you two?" Lisa had brushed it off at the time. "Yeah, he's just stressed about work," she had replied, even though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. Now, sitting alone in their bedroom, the unease that had been simmering for months boiled over into full-blown dread. Lisa spent the rest of the afternoon distracted, pacing the house and trying to work but failing miserably. By the time Mark came home, carrying a bag of Thai food, her nerves were frayed. "Hey," he said, setting the bag on the counter. His tone was casual, too casual, and it only made Lisa feel worse. "Hi," she replied, trying to sound normal. She watched as he unpacked the containers, her eyes scanning his face for any clue about what was coming. They ate in near silence, the clinking of forks on plates the only sound between them. Finally, when the meal was over and the dishes were pushed aside, Mark leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Lisa," he began, his voice measured but firm. "I've been thinking about us a lot lately." There it was. "I don't know how to say this, but I think we've grown apart. I feel like we're more like roommates than a married couple." Lisa felt like the wind had been knocked out of her. She stared at him, unable to speak. "I think it's best if we separate," he continued, avoiding her eyes. "I've been unhappy for a while, and I think you have too. We've just been going through the motions, you know?" "No," Lisa said finally, her voice shaking. "I don't know. This is the first time you've said anything like this to me." Mark looked uncomfortable. "I didn't want to hurt you, Lisa. But I've made up my mind. I want a divorce." The word hung in the air between them, sharp and final. Lisa's mind raced. Divorce? After 8 years of marriage? After everything they'd been through together? How could he make such a huge decision without even talking to her about it first? "Is there someone else?" she asked suddenly, the question tumbling out before she could stop it. Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Lisa to see the answer in his eyes. "There's no one else," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Lisa stared at him, her chest tightening. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she knew it would get her nowhere. Mark had already made up his mind. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, arguments, and heartbreak. Mark moved out of the house and into a small apartment across town, leaving Lisa alone with their memories and 1,000 unanswered questions. She tried to focus on her work, pouring her energy into her business, but even that couldn't distract her from the pain. Then came the second blow. Lisa was scrolling through social media one evening when she saw it. A photo of Mark and Emma, smiling together at a friend's party. Lisa's heart sank as she realized how close they were standing, the way Emma's hand rested lightly on Mark's arm. The caption read, "Great night with these two lovebirds." Lovebirds. The pieces clicked into place so quickly it made Lisa's head spin. Mark and Emma, her husband and her best friend. The betrayal was almost too much to process. Lisa spent the next several days in a fog, replaying every interaction between the two of them in her mind. She thought about the way Emma had always laughed a little too hard at Mark's jokes, the way Mark had started texting more often but never said who he was texting. How could she have been so blind? When she finally confronted Emma, it was over the phone. Lisa couldn't bring herself to face her in person. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Lisa, I didn't want you to find out like this," Emma said finally. "So it's true," Lisa said, her throat tightening. "You and Mark." "It just happened," Emma said, her tone defensive. "We didn't plan this, Lisa, but we fell in love." "I'm sorry." "Sorry?" Lisa repeated, her voice rising. "You're sorry? You were supposed to be my best friend, Emma." Emma tried to explain, but Lisa couldn't listen anymore. She hung up the phone and sat there in silence, tears streaming down her face. The next time Lisa saw Mark was at the final divorce hearing. He looked tired but resolute, as if he had already moved on. Lisa, on the other hand, felt like her world had been turned upside down. She didn't tell him about her business or the money she had saved. She didn't see the point. He had chosen someone else. When the divorce was finalized, Lisa walked out of the courthouse feeling both empty and strangely free. She had lost her husband and her best friend, but she still had herself. And she still had her secret. A fortune she had built with her own hands, one that no one could take away from her. But as she stood on the courthouse steps, staring out at the busy street, Lisa made a silent promise to herself. She would not let this betrayal define her. Mark and Emma had made their choices, and now it was her turn. She would rebuild. She would thrive. And one day, they would see exactly what they had lost. Lisa stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her face pale and drawn. The past 6 months had been some of the hardest of her life. The divorce had taken a toll not just on her emotions, but on her confidence. Losing Mark was one thing. Losing him to her best friend was something else entirely. The betrayal cut deep, and the humiliation of being the last to know made it worse. For weeks after the divorce, Lisa found herself consumed with anger and sadness. She replayed every argument, every moment of doubt, wondering what she could have done differently. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized something important. Mark and Emma hadn't broken her. They had only revealed their own flaws. This realization was a turning point for Lisa. Slowly, she began to redirect her energy. Instead of dwelling on the past, she focused on the one thing she still had complete control over: her business. Lisa's marketing agency had always been her passion, but now it became her lifeline. She threw herself into work, taking on bigger clients and hiring additional team members to handle the growing workload. She started waking up earlier, using her mornings to plan her goals and map out strategies for the company. By the end of the year, her agency had doubled its revenue, and she was closing in on her first $1 million in annual earnings. But it wasn't just about the money. For Lisa, building her business was about reclaiming her sense of self-worth. For years, she had downplayed her success, even hiding it from her husband. Now she felt a growing pride in what she had accomplished. She didn't need Mark, and she certainly didn't need his approval. Despite her growing success, Lisa kept a low profile. She wasn't ready to make her financial achievements public, and she wasn't interested in flaunting her wealth. Instead, she focused on self-improvement. She started going to therapy, where she worked through the pain of the divorce and began to heal. She joined a women's entrepreneur group, where she met other ambitious, successful women who encouraged her to dream even bigger. One of those women, Maya, quickly became a mentor and friend. Maya owned a multi-million-dollar software company and had a no-nonsense attitude that Lisa found refreshing. "Stop playing small," Maya told her over lunch one day. "You've built something incredible, Lisa. You should be shouting it from the rooftops." Lisa hesitated. "I don't know. I guess I'm afraid of drawing too much attention. I don't want people to think I'm bragging." Maya rolled her eyes. "Who cares what people think? You worked for this. Own it." Maya's words stuck with Lisa. She started to think about how much time she had spent shrinking herself, hiding her success to make other people more comfortable. For years, she had put Mark's ego ahead of her own happiness. That was over now. A few months later, Lisa took a big step outside her comfort zone. She agreed to speak at a local business conference about her journey as an entrepreneur. Standing on stage in front of hundreds of people, she shared her story. How she had started with nothing, taught herself the skills she needed, and built a thriving business from scratch. The audience's response was overwhelming. After her speech, dozens of people came up to thank her, saying how inspired they were by her journey. For the first time, Lisa felt truly seen. She realized that by sharing her story, she could help others see what was possible for them, too. Meanwhile, Mark and Emma's picture-perfect relationship was starting to crack. Lisa didn't go looking for updates on their lives, but she heard things through mutual friends. Emma, it seemed, wasn't thrilled about Mark's financial situation. She had expected him to be the provider, but without Lisa's secret income bolstering their lifestyle, things weren't quite as glamorous as Emma had hoped. By now, Lisa had turned 40 in November, and she was halfway to the goal. One evening, Lisa ran into Sarah, a mutual friend of hers and Emma's, at a networking event. They exchanged pleasantries, but Sarah couldn't resist dropping a few tidbits about Mark and Emma's rocky marriage. "Emma's been complaining to anyone who will listen," Sarah said, lowering her voice. "She thought Mark was this big success, but now she's realizing he's, well, average." Lisa couldn't help but smile. Just a little. It wasn't schadenfreude exactly, but there was something satisfying about knowing that the people who had betrayed her weren't exactly thriving. Still, Lisa wasn't interested in revenge. She was focused on her own life, and she had bigger goals to achieve. By the end of the year, Lisa's agency had been featured in several industry publications, and she had landed her biggest client yet, a multi-million-dollar tech startup looking for a long-term marketing partner. Her business was booming, and she was finally starting to feel like her old self again, only stronger and more confident. Lisa also started to open herself up to new relationships. She wasn't actively looking for love, but she was no longer closed off to the idea. She went on a few dates, met new people, and slowly began to rebuild her social life. One evening, while out with a group of friends, Lisa realized something important. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about Mark or Emma. She wasn't replaying the betrayal in her head or wondering what she could have done differently. She was simply enjoying the moment, laughing and talking with people who valued her for who she was. As she walked home that night, Lisa felt a deep sense of peace. She had survived the worst heartbreak of her life, and she had come out stronger on the other side. Her success wasn't about proving anything to Mark or Emma. It was about proving something to herself. She didn't need revenge. Success was its own kind of justice. And Lisa was just getting started. Lisa stood in front of the large glass windows of her office, looking out at the skyline. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the city. It had been 2 years since her divorce, and in those 2 years, so much had changed. She had built a successful, thriving business from the ground up, all on her own. She had rediscovered her sense of self, something she thought she had lost forever, and she had finally found peace within herself, free from the weight of the betrayal that had once consumed her. Her phone buzzed on her desk, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Maya, her mentor and close friend. "You did it! I just saw the article. Congrats on the Forbes feature." Lisa smiled, picking up her phone to read the article. It was a feature on her agency's rise to success, highlighting her innovative approach to digital marketing and how she had transformed her business in such a short amount of time. It felt surreal. A few years ago, she had been hiding her success, afraid to show the world what she had achieved. Now, she was being recognized as one of the leading entrepreneurs in her field. The validation felt good. But it wasn't what mattered most to Lisa. What mattered was how far she had come, and how much stronger she had become as a result of everything she had been through. She set the phone down and glanced at her reflection in the glass. The woman staring back at her was different from the woman who had once been broken by betrayal. She was confident, empowered, and ready for whatever came next. As if on cue, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before opening it, wondering who it could be. "Lisa, it's Mark. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I've been thinking about everything lately. I just wanted to apologize for everything I did. You didn't deserve any of it. I'm not asking for anything, just wanted to say I'm sorry. I hope you're doing well." Lisa stared at the screen, her fingers frozen on the phone. Mark's message wasn't long, but it hit her harder than she had expected. Part of her had expected this moment to come, Mark realizing the mistakes he had made, reaching out to apologize. But now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to feel. She sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about Mark over the past 2 years. There had been moments, especially in the early days of the divorce, when she had wondered about him, how he was doing, if he regretted his decisions. But over time, those thoughts had faded into the background. She had learned to live without him, and while she had no intention of reopening old wounds, there was something cathartic about receiving this apology. She sat down in the back of the living room, but as she thought about the past, her gaze shifted back to the present. She had built a life that was entirely her own. She had done the work to heal, to grow, and to rise from the ashes of her broken marriage. The woman she had become had nothing to do with Mark or Emma. It was the result of her own strength and resilience. With a deep breath, Lisa typed out a response. "Thank you for your message, Mark. I appreciate the apology. I've moved on, and I'm doing well. I hope you find peace too." It was simple, direct, and final. She didn't need to say anything more. There was no need for explanations, no need for closure. She had already closed that chapter of her life. She hit send, put the phone down, and refocused on the work in front of her. Weeks went by, and Lisa's life continued to flourish. Her agency had signed several high-profile clients, and her reputation continued to grow. She spoke at more conferences, participated in panel discussions, and was increasingly sought after as a mentor for other women in business. She was living a life she had once only dreamed of. Then one day she got a message on LinkedIn. It was from an executive at a prominent tech company that had recently gone public. The message was short and to the point. "Lisa, I've been following your work and I'm impressed by your success. We're looking for someone to lead our digital marketing team. We've seen the incredible results you've achieved, and we believe you're the perfect person to help us take things to the next level. Would you be interested in a conversation?" Lisa stared at the message, her heart pounding. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. It was everything she had worked for. An offer from a major player in the industry, the kind of recognition she had once only dreamed of. She had built her business from the ground up, and now here she was, being offered a chance to step into a bigger role with even greater responsibility. For a moment, she felt a surge of excitement, but then, just as quickly, doubt crept in. Was she ready to leave her agency behind? Was this the right move? She sat down at her desk, thinking it over. This wasn't just about the money or the title. It was about the future. It was about what she truly wanted. As she thought about it, Lisa realized that her journey had never been about proving anything to anyone else. It had always been about proving something to herself. She had spent so many years in Mark's shadow, questioning her worth and shrinking herself to make others feel comfortable. Now she was living for herself, and no matter what offer came her way, no matter how prestigious, she needed to stay true to her vision. Lisa picked up her phone, opened LinkedIn, and typed out her response. "Thank you for the offer. I'm honored by the opportunity, but I've built something I'm truly passionate about, and I'm not ready to step away from it. I'm grateful for your consideration, but I believe I'm on the right path for me." She hit send, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. She had made the right decision. That night, Lisa sat on her balcony, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the journey she had taken, about the broken marriage, the betrayal, the struggle, and ultimately the triumph. She had built a life that was hers and hers alone, one that didn't rely on anyone else's validation. She had discovered her own worth, her own strength. And as she thought about everything that had happened, she realized something important. The real victory wasn't the success or the recognition or even the financial achievements. It was the fact that she had found herself again, that she had come through the other side of pain and come out stronger, more resilient, and more self-assured than ever before. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt completely at peace. Life had thrown her some hard lessons, but she had learned them well. Now she was ready for whatever came next. And with that, Lisa smiled. She had already won.